Welcome to your deep dive.
Oh.
Today, we're going to be exploring Freemasonry and really focusing on justice and morality.
Okay.
And to do that, we're going to be looking at Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry by Albert Pike,
Right.
published in 1878.
Yeah, it's a classic.
It really is.
And it's got a lot of these sort of like little pieces of wisdom that even if you're not a Mason, I think you can still get a lot out of.
Yeah, one of the sections that really stood out to me was about being a judge within the Masonic order, which is called a Grand Inspector Inquisitor Commander.
Wow.
Right? It sounds very...
It sounds very official.
It's a mouthful. It's very official sounding. But what I really liked about what Pike said about this role is that it all comes down to some pretty simple universal principles.
Yeah, he really emphasizes patience and careful consideration.
Right.
And like, above all else, impartiality, which I think we could all use a bit more of in our lives, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And the way he uses Masonic symbolism to illustrate this is pretty cool, too.
Totally. He takes these symbols that could seem, just ceremonial, and he's like, no, there's a deeper meaning here.
Give me an example.
So, like, the square and compasses, they're not just tools for Masons, they're like ethical guides for a judge.
I like that. How so?
Well, you've got the square, right?
Right.
And that represents uprightness, accuracy.
I can see that.
Yeah, it's like a visual reminder that your judgment has to be precise and full of integrity.
No crooked lines.
Exactly.
I like...
And then you've got the compasses,
Okay.
which draw a circle, a
Uh.
perfect circle of truth encompassing everything without bias.
Oh, I like that.
Right? So it's like, remember to consider all sides of an issue before you make a decision.
It's like these tools become physical representations of really abstract ideals.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like a judge's oath, but,
Hmm.
etched in metal and wood or whatever.
Exactly. And Pike doesn't stop there.
There's more.
Oh, yeah. He says these tools, these principles, they're not just for judging other people. He's like, you gotta turn that scrutiny inward.
Oh boy, self-judgment time.
Right. It's not enough to judge others fairly. You have to hold yourself to that same standard.
So it's like, are we judging others by the same standards we're applying to ourselves?
Exactly. He talks about making sure your own temple is in order first.
I like that. I mean, that's a lifelong process though, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's about constantly checking your own biases and making sure you're being as fair to yourself as you are to others.
Yeah, nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect, that's for sure.
As I was digging into this section on judges, I came across a symbol Pike mentions that really piqued my curiosity, the Tetractys.
Oh, the Tetractys. It's one of those symbols that might seem simple on the surface, but it's absolutely packed with layers of meaning, especially in Masonic thought.
It sounds like it.
Uh,
Pike describes it as a triangle formed by 9 points, often placed in the east, where you typically see a sacred word or symbol. He also mentions it was important to Pythagoras. What's the significance there?
Well, for Pythagoras, who was a philosopher and mathematician, the Tetractys represented the very essence of the universe. It embodies mathematical principles, musical harmony, and even cosmic order. So it was a symbol with incredible depth and power.
So how does that connect to Freemasonry and the role of a judge?
Pike explains that the 9 points of the Tetractys, when arranged in that triangular shape, represent the 3 core attributes of the deity: wisdom, strength, and beauty.
Wisdom, strength, and beauty, those sound like pretty important qualities for a judge to embody.
Exactly. But it goes even deeper than that. Those same 3 attributes also represent the 3 supports of the Masonic temple, which itself is often seen as a symbol of the universe.
So it's like this multi-layered symbol connecting the individual Mason, the judge, to these grand cosmic forces.
Precisely. And within the Tetractys, Pike points out even more symbolic connections. He talks about how the cube, representing faith in the invisible, can be found within its form. He even uses the idea of the triangle's infinite divisibility to illustrate both the vastness of the universe and the infinite nature of the deity.
It's amazing how much meaning is packed into this one symbol.
It is, and I think that's part of what fascinated Pike, is this idea that these geometric shapes, these seemingly simple forms, can hold such profound truths.
That reminds me of something we were talking about earlier, the idea of constantly striving to see beyond the surface, to look for the deeper meaning behind things. It's like that with the Tetractys. You have to look closer, explore the layers to really grasp its significance.
Exactly. And Pike doesn't let us get comfortable just pondering symbols. He then takes this big leap from these intricate symbols to a broader concept, that of universal laws.
Yes. He draws this fascinating parallel between the law of gravity and what he calls a universal law of justice. It made me think about how we often take gravity for granted, but it's this invisible force that shapes our entire reality. Is he suggesting something similar about justice?
I think so. He's suggesting that just as gravity governs the physical world, there's this universal law of justice that governs the moral realm, even if we don't fully understand it. He cautions us against assuming that just because we might not grasp the complexities of this universal law, it doesn't exist.
So it's about acknowledging that there are forces at play beyond our immediate understanding, but those forces are still shaping the world around us.
Right, and he uses a rather stark example to illustrate this point, that of a hawk catching and eating a lark.
Okay, how does that connect to universal justice?
Well, from our limited perspective, it seems cruel, unfair, but Pike suggests that within the grand scheme of the natural world, it's simply part of the natural order.
So it's about recognizing that there are different levels of justice, different ways of understanding fairness that might not always align with our human-centric viewpoint.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in our own sense of what's right and wrong.
Right, and Pike is really pushing us to think bigger picture here. Like, there might be this whole other level of cosmic order that we don't fully grasp. Okay, but then he brings us back down to earth and talks about the challenge of actually, applying justice in a world that often feels kind of unfair.
Yeah, he doesn't let us off the hook with just like grand theories.
Right, because it's easy to talk about these high ideals, but to actually live by them.
Exactly. And he's like, it's even harder when you're the one making decisions that affect other people.
Especially when there's no easy answer.
Right? He uses this example of a general who has to decide whether to destroy a bridge,
Okay.
even though it means some of his own troops won't make it back.
Oh, wow, that's a tough one.
Right. It's like a classic moral dilemma where any choice has huge consequences.
Yeah, and it shows that sometimes doing the right thing means making really difficult sacrifices.
And I think Pike recognizes that there's not always a perfect solution. He's more interested in us understanding the complexity of these situations.
So it's about constantly striving for justice, even if we know we might never achieve it perfectly.
Yeah, he points out that like nations are always revising their laws, trying to make things more fair. And he says this desire for justice, it's like deeply human.
And it's reflected in so many ways, right? Like in our stories, our art.
Absolutely. It's like we're hardwired to want a just world, even if we don't always know how to create one.
So every little act of justice, every time we choose fairness, it adds to that bigger picture.
Exactly. Like those choices, they matter more than we might realize.
So we've got from talking about the role of a judge in Freemasonry to like these really big ideas about universal laws and human nature.
It's all connected though, right?
It is. It's about striving for justice in all aspects of life. And I think that's something we can all take away from Pike's writing.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, like, what if he's right? What if every time we choose to act justly, it really does create a ripple effect that makes the world a little bit better?
That's something to think about for sure. So until next time, keep seeking justice and keep diving deeper.